So I think it should be good. Yeah. All right, we are live. I think you can see that. Yeah. You all set?
Yeah.
All right, get started. Thank you for coming to this week's weather briefing. We have Rob Lydick today, executive producer at Weather World. So thank you, Rob, for being here. Yeah, whenever you're ready.
Awesome. Short and sweet introductions. We like that. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for once again having me to give a forecast briefing. Love giving these, and Campus Weather Service, I was president, over 10 years ago. So I love contributing wherever I can. So for those of us who are here, I know a couple of folks in the back of the room were here for this particular event. Right around this date, going back in 2010, was when we were dealing with the infamous Snowmageddon storm. So all told, Bill, I think we got about 14 inches of snow here in State College from this particular event. Of course, it was most notable in the DC area, and you can see some of the higher pockets of snow there in the Laurel Highlands. But that's what was going on this day about 13 years ago. The interesting thing about that season, this was kind of a nice write-up that they did looking back at the storm in 2020 in the Washington Post, was that season, and it was the same here in State College too, the snow stuck around for quite a while. They actually had another storm that moved through. I don't even remember the Snowverkill storm that was listed on this graphic, but yeah, I remember standing out in front of Irvin Hall. The fire alarm had been pulled, and I think the snow had been sliding off the slate roofs, and there were pieces of slate tile falling off the building. It was a pretty good storm, and I think this was one of the few snow days that we actually had when we were here at undergrad. Now, of course, we get a 3-inch snowstorm and the university's closed, but back in the day. So also talking about things that are notable, of course, this weekend, we had the cold blast, or as I like to call it, and I called it on Weather World on Friday, the cold snap. So this was just a sampling of some of the lows and some of the records that were tied or bested across, especially parts of New England, Maine, Augusta, the capital there dropping down at -17. So some of these records falling, look at the Boston record falling substantially so by about 8 degrees. And that was set all the way back in 1886. Of course, you probably saw atop of Mount Washington, the video was incredible of the winds whipping at about 100 miles an hour, but officially setting a record wind chill. You can see it there, -108 set. I think that's actually a U.S. record. And that was with an air temperature of about -46. I think the all-time record low temperature since observing began. They have some records, I think, that go back to, here it says here, 1885. But the all-time record, I think, is -47, or there's a -50 reading, I guess, in 1885. So close to the record there, but at least in terms of wind chill, it was a new record atop Mount Washington. Now, we talked about this in some of our weather communications classes. And of course, whenever I'm talking with students dealing with Weather World, yes, I'm not, dealing with hurricanes in my day-to-day life. However, you are expected, if you work at a TV station, to be the station scientist. And so it's, of course, one of those things where even on CNN this morning, I saw that they actually went to a meteorologist to talk about the earthquake that occurred in Turkey this morning. So there was an earthquake overnight, magnitude 7.8. Right now, estimated death toll at least 1,800. And this is a part of the world where it's on a fault line, and so earthquakes happen all the time. I think this actually rivals the 7.8 earthquake that occurred there back in the mid-1930s. Just for perspective, the aftershock from this particular earthquake, they had a pretty strong one this morning at about 5 o'clock Eastern time. Here, aftershock was 7.5. Closer to home, there was actually an earthquake that was felt in Buffalo. I don't know if anybody saw that, but it actually registered, I think, a 3.8. So we'll be kind of curious to see what other aftershocks we see kind of in the aftermath of this particular earthquake. All right, talking about weather now, shifting gears. Here's a look at climatology for this date, 35 and 20. We are just past the climatological minimum, so we're just starting our upward trend in terms of climatology. And across the state, you can see generally highs this time of year range from the freezing mark in Bradford to the low 40s in Philly. Lows are anywhere from the teens across the northern tier to low to mid 20s across the south. This morning, of course, we're starting things off on a much different note than we had Friday and Saturday. It feels actually like spring. I was talking to Ben, and it feels very springy, and that's kind of the theme of this week, more of the mild as we go through this week. But I think even by midweek here, we're talking high temperatures once again, probably in the lower 50s. Some places in Southeast PA probably ticking up towards 60 as we go through this week. How many of you in Campus Weather Service are familiar with the Keystone Mesonet? Okay, a couple people. So we're actually lucky that we have the State Climate Office here in the department. So Kyle Imhoff, he actually works with a lot of these organizations here to maintain this network of Mesonet sites. So it kind of rivals what you see Oklahoma, New York, a lot of other states have their Mesonet sites, and they're installing new ones as we go on. A lot of these sites actually have some cameras. So we actually use some of these cameras on Weather World. There's one on top on Davis and in Cherry Springs, and trying to fill in some of those data holes that we have across the Commonwealth. Yeah, generally 30s and 40s right now, even some lower 50s in far Southeast PA. Big change, of course, in a lot of locations from just 24 hours ago. Even earlier this morning, we were about 20 degrees higher compared to this time yesterday morning. So certainly starting things off on a spring-like note. Dew points are actually falling as well. So we had a cold front kind of skirt by, a little shortwave really, that kind of skirted by, and it's now scooting off to our east. And so some drier air now moving in, and temperatures, again, still feeling spring-like across the Commonwealth. Let's take a look at the water vapor. So yeah, we've got this one storm system that looked like it was maybe going to be a little bit more potent, I guess, offshore, but really just kind of skirted by, and some drier air now moving in. For the most part, our pattern is going to remain fairly active as we go through this week, but the storm track is not favorable for wintry weather. In fact, a lot of the storms that we see that will skirt by will actually keep us in the warm sector. So when we're talking precipitation, for the most part this week, I think it's going to be liquid. Unless we're talking about maybe late week at the onset, there could be maybe a freezing rain potential in some parts of PA. And perhaps as things wrap up going into the beginning of the weekend, we could see a conclusion maybe in the form of some snow. I did think this was interesting. I've been talking about this on Weather World. Great Lakes ice coverage is still quite low for this time of February, but we've seen a pretty dramatic uptick in the ice coverage on Erie just over the course of the last week or so. So total ice coverage right now stands at about 19% for all of the Great Lakes, but check this out for Lake Erie. So Lake Erie usually peaks sometime around mid-February in terms of ice coverage, and the historical average there represented by the red line indicates that the average is probably somewhere around 65%. I noticed in just the last week or so alone, we've quickly jumped to about 41% ice covered this morning. Of course, this week, not going to be really conducive for building a lot of ice on Lake Erie, with temperatures probably in the 40s and 50s as we go through. So we had a weak kind of short wave that tracked through, and of course that system offshore. So here's a look at the radars. We kind of go through the last couple of hours, and any light precip kind of fizzled out, and we will eventually see some drier conditions moving in here as we go through the day today. The clouds will probably linger for a while. I should go back actually and take a look at this sat. So of course, if you live in Southeast PA, this is pretty typical. Southeast of the mountains this time of year gets in on more sunshine than we do. A few breaks in the clouds, so you can clearly see the gravity waves, those nice ripples over parts of central PA as we go through this morning. And nice to see some of the snow cover across the Midwest as well. You can see that especially in lower Michigan and up towards the upper Midwest as well. So taking a look at just kind of the surface setup, there's that weak system that's kind of exiting just offshore. So that'll be pushing off to our east. Disturbance down here over parts of the southern plains. We're going to be watching that one, or it'll eventually be moving into the southern plains. And we'll be watching that one as we go into the middle part of this week. But as I mentioned, the storm track really kind of not favorable for wintry precipitation. In fact, a lot of the guidance suggests that we're going to be mild going into the middle of this month. So here's a look at our height anomalies, and we can see that one trough kind of exiting offshore. Ridge builds in for just a kind of a brief respite, but we're watching this little short wave that's going to be tracking by to our north and that'll bring us some precip as we go into Tuesday, and eventually we get into another brief respite, and then here comes our storm system for the end of the week. So it's kind of that, active pattern. We always like to say kind of a rinse and repeat situation where every couple of days you get a storm that will kind of come through and impact us. With this, there's a little bit of uncertainty as we go into the weekend on exactly the track of the storm and just how that's going to materialize. So that's something that you should keep in mind for your forecast in CWS this week. So a little bit of a different perspective. You can see that we're going to eventually see this trough moving out, ridge builds in and kind of dries us out for at least the next bit before our next storm moves in for Tuesday, with the storm track well off to our north and west, and so that's not favorable for any kind of frozen precip here. And then eventually another brief respite before our next storm system kind of skirts through the Great Lakes as we go into Thursday. Warm sector with that one, as I mentioned, maybe a little bit of frozen precip at the onset, especially I think in parts of the Endless Mountains or Northeast PA, and then maybe concluding as a bit of snow, depending on what model you buy. For a different perspective on what the GFS was showing, let's look at this. And so we'll go all the way back here to today. So there's our exiting storm system. Brief respite, next storm track, we're in the warm sector here. High pressure just offshore that departs, and we get in some rain. It looks fairly light. In fact, overall, QPF this week is not looking to be super impactful, probably less than half an inch for most places. Brief respite as we go into the later part of Wednesday. Next storm system moves in, and with the storm track that takes us through the Great Lakes, looks to be another wet day going into Thursday. But as I mentioned at the onset, there could be a little bit of frozen rain, or freezing rain, I should say, in probably parts of Northeast PA. That departs off to the north and east, and then I think we could perhaps see a little bit of leftover snow as this next kind of storm system moves in right behind the previous low. So it's kind of immediately followed by this next low that develops, eventually occludes, and we get maybe some wraparound snow as we go into Saturday. Once again, I think in parts of the Laurel Highlands or Western PA, they're likely going to be inundated with some snow. I talked to my parents yesterday. They live in Indiana County. They still had about a dusting of snow on the ground. Upslope snow showers this time of year, pretty common. And of course, we had some of those little squalls or little bands that kind of moved through on Friday. They ended up getting, about an inch of snow or so out of that. That's pretty typical for Western PA this time of year. So folks are going to be traveling, on 99 or 22 this weekend, probably running into some snow, I would suspect, on Saturday. Also, of course, with the tight packing of the isobars, looks like things get pretty breezy here as well. And then probably drying out for the tail end of the weekend. Now that's, of course, what the GFS is showing. Looking at the Euro solution, we'll go all the way back to this week. And there's pretty good agreement. Again, warm sector here as we go into the Tuesday, kind of late Wednesday situation. Notice the 540 line. Of course, with the timing of that, it wouldn't surprise me if maybe we get into a little bit of frozen precip, I guess, across the northern tier. Wednesday looking dry, and then here comes that next storm. Again, remarkable consistency with the track of that one going through the Great Lakes. So still warm sector and still showery here on Thursday. And then if we just go back to the 0Z just to kind of see what we're looking at. I think that the same thing could be true here. Maybe at the onset, there's a little bit of frozen potential, I think, in Northeast PA before we get into Saturday. And this is interesting here with what it's doing with that next low. Could be a little bit more robust in terms of frozen precip, at least if you believe the Euro solution on Saturday. So something to watch there. Of course, anything this far out, remains to be seen exactly how it's going to evolve. Just for jollies, we'll take a look at the Canadian as well. So going back in time, still pretty good consistency with pretty much everything leading up to, I think, the weekend, and then things a little bit different there with the position of that low and just how much cold air we'll get in here. So something to kind of watch as we go into the upcoming weekend. Here's a look at the Euro perspective. This is just the backside of the EWAL page, kind of comparing models. I actually really like to look whenever we're looking at something more in the longer range, whenever we're doing our week 2 trend segment, or if we're looking at maybe climate watch for weather world, we'll kind of look at this page. This is a nice comparison of the ensembles between the GFS, the Canadian, and the Euro. So this is kind of a good way to show kind of that the oscillations that we have in the pattern with general ridging across the eastern U.S. as we go into this week. Still kind of watching that piece of energy that comes in for Friday into Saturday. But even though it looks, it looks ominous on this perspective here, it's actually still not going to be really that cold. I think highs will still generally be probably in the mid to upper 30s. So I mean, still seasonable, I think, for this time of year before there's a pretty good sign that we warm things right back up. So that's kind of been the trend as we've gone through this winter. Obviously, very mild, one of the warmest Januaries we've had on record, but still locking in the warmth. Whatever chill does arrive does not stick around for very long. In terms of temperature, this is a good product. I think I've seen a lot of CWS using this when it comes to their forecast, but this is the NVM viewer, and so we're kind of looking at just a model here of what the NVM is showing for University Park. And yeah, 40s, warmest day of the week is likely Thursday, with that storm tracking through the Great Lakes and pulling in some good warm air. And then, kind of things don't really cool down all that much. Yeah, we're not going to be in the 50s anymore, but even still by Saturday, if we have a high anywhere from the mid to upper 30s, that's seasonable, for this time of year. And then there's a good signal, as we saw in several of those other models, that we just warm things right back up as we go into next week as well. Different perspective. This is actually a page off of the WPC page. Marissa and I like to use this product a lot for just kind of whenever you're making your forecast, it helps give that perspective on how does this relate to normal. This is the NDFB product, so this is what the National Weather Service forecast is, but it is kind of a good base point when you're trying to find where are some of the biggest anomalies going to be over the course of the next 7 days. So it's interesting to note that the warmth is pretty much in place across most of the eastern U.S. as we go into this week, and still, as we've kind of seen over the last couple of weeks, relative chill, below average for this time of year in the Rockies and parts of the West, but no big time cold. I mean, if you're looking at today, the coldest spot in the U.S. indicated by this blue star here is probably somewhere in Utah. You're not really looking at any single digits for forecast highs showing up on this map as we go through this week. So really no big chill. And even by the time we get to the weekend, once that storm system departs, things are seasonable for this time of year, in much of Pennsylvania. So it's a fairly kind of boring forecast, but as we kind of said, it's more on the springy side. And as I mentioned, I think Thursday rather is likely to be the warmest day of the week. Now take a look at these overnight lows. So we go from 20s to a lot of this week. Overnight lows are not going to drop below freezing. There's going to be a period of at least a couple of days here where State College doesn't drop below freezing. And check out Philadelphia, at least on the forecast here, as that storm system kind of sweeps through. They're still in the warm sector. They may not drop, out of the 40s as we go into the start of the weekend from those lows. So it's going to be mild as we go through the week, not only in terms of highs, but in terms of lows as well. And precipitation, mostly in the form of liquid, except for maybe some northern parts of Pennsylvania. QPF outlook. This is just kind of a broad look at, what is the WPC expecting, over the course of the next 7 days or so. And a pretty good bullseye across parts of the Mississippi River Valley where they were dealing with record low water levels last year. And certainly still wet. It's the wet season, of course, in the Pacific Northwest. But here in Pennsylvania, if you look at least according to this WPC product, for the next 7 days, really anywhere from a 3/4 of an inch of liquid or less farther south. Maybe a little bit more on the backside of that storm system this weekend across northwest PA, where they'll probably get into some lake effect in Erie County and Crawford counties. But for the most part, things are looking to be fairly quiet aside for some rain showers this week. With that said, I kind of kept things short and sweet today because it's a Monday and I know we've got a lot of stuff to do, but questions for the forecast. It's not particularly interesting, but if you're like me and after walking into Walker Building on Friday with the cold air smacking you in the face, 40s and 50s, not too hard to take.
Could you bring the viz up again?
Yeah.
Out in the Midwest this time.
Let's do this.
It's obscured by clouds. I was surprised last Thursday, looking at Minnesota and Iowa on the viz. I could swear that the rivers were not frozen. When you looked at the viz, you could see the snow cover. You could still see the rivers.
Okay.
But it would be, we can't see it today. I was just surprised.
Yeah, I should actually look and
You
see.
can kind of see there and
Oh, sorry. Well, it was here, sorry, John. There it is.
what state is it? Nebraska? Look in eastern Nebraska. Can you zoom in?
Let's see. Yeah, you can see something there.
I mean, something's poking through the snow cover.
Something's spoken.
There's a link there.
Right here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna look and see in terms of ice coverage, what the, if there's a way to see, like what should the average be this time of year? I know that's on here. This page is not always the easiest to navigate. Because I know that that's actually been an analog that we've used before for long shots. I think you used that actually maybe even last year with the record low, or at least very low ice coverage on the Great Lakes. I want to say we used that at some point. Maybe you did that in March of last year.
It might have been 2 years ago.
Other points that any folks noticed in their musings on the weather recently. So shameless plug for, so I'm sorry, go ahead, Cam.
I mean, I guess I was just surprised for next week, even just like some of the MDM guidance. I mean, just how above average it's showing this far out. In times that's been a signal for really warm temperatures. So that was interesting.
Yeah, I actually, sometimes, and I'll just kind of see what the heck the CPC is saying, if that kind of goes with what some of the ensemble products were showing, and it is remarkably warm. This takes us, I guess, till the 19th of February. As I mentioned, if we do see that little kind of cool snap, if you will, of going into the weekend, it's still only seasonable, for this time of year. Where is that comparison? Too many tabs. Yeah. But it's very fleeting. It just builds right back in. So that's something we'll be looking at. I mean, I guess we're due to do climate watch here in 2 weeks or so. And I think our climate watch forecast actually called for just fleeting, like if chill arrives, it wouldn't stay around for very long. I guess I don't even have to use about that. I can just go to the website and see our forecast. We called for that. So no more than 2 stretches of 3 or more days with max temps more than 8 degrees below average. And steady diet of January storms so far.
Not gonna have any.
Yeah, so far that's good. As a shameless plug for Weather World this week, just because, first of all, in case it was unclear, and I should also just say to Campus Weather Service in general, anybody and everyone is always welcome to come watch the show. We record every day at 4:30. It's good content. John always has a really nice, Dr. Dees always has a really nice episode of Weatherwise. It kind of talks about different things. Last week it was on Phil and his accuracy, or lack thereof. But we always record at 4:30. And so you're always welcome to come down, see what the process is behind the scenes. Whether or not you have any desire to be in broadcasting, I know Caitlin's on the show. And Caitlin, you probably don't want to go into broadcasting, but the communication skills that you develop by doing Campus Weather Service video or doing stuff with Weather World, you can use those across any field. But also just if you're a weather weenie, there's always some good content. So like this week, we're in the middle of our trivia contest. So we do a trivia contest every year. It's probably been going on for about 20 years or so or more. And there are weather facts that aren't always Googleable, so we're actually reviewing the answers for that on Tuesday's show. And then on Thursday, we've got a student feature that Caroline Castor produced on disc golf and kind of like the weather impacts and like how they'll play in the wintertime and things like that. So we always try to have a good mix of forecasting segments, but then also kind of like those interesting like weather, educational components to the show. We'll also do climate eyes and some things like that that are talking about, Dana did a really nice piece on how a changing climate is impacting the equine industry. So that's just a shameless plug for Weather World. You're always welcome to come watch the show.
Well, if no one has anything else, probably put their good crowd today, so thank you all for coming out.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Rob.
Yeah, of course.
Next week we'll have our very own Bill Cyrette do the weather briefing, so hope to see you guys then.
How much did you have to pay him?